A film that I recorded some time ago and finally got around to watching was looking at looking. Helps if I get the title right. Looking for Mr. Goodbar. It's the story of a young woman in New York in the mid 1970s, played by Diane Keaton, who has come from a very strict Catholic family and is at the start of the story studying at university, studying English, and begins an affair with her lecturer. And slowly over the course of the story, becomes more and more engaged in, well, it's hard to describe really, but it's kind of low activities: drinking, smoking, taking drugs, promiscuity. As a but the reasons are deliberately kept vague. The film is actually based on a true story, very loosely on a true story about a teacher of deaf children in New York who was murdered by a man she brought home from a bar, and it was discovered that she was leading this double life, which meant that anyone who would have as a day job something as noble and altruistic as teaching deaf children couldn't possibly engage with something as low and disgusting as sleeping with men or going to bars. And the film it takes an odd, vaguely non-judgmental attitude to most of her behaviour. Obviously, it says, drugs are illegal, and that has consequences. There are occasional scenes where our main character daydreams consequences. So she daydreams that she'll be taken off to prison after she's found with cocaine, though that never actually happens. But at the end of the film, there are consequences. The climax of the film, and this is, I don't really see much harm in spoiling a film that's over 40 years old. On New Year's Eve, just as she's starting to turn her life around, she goes home with a man she meets in a bar who she actually used to distract and divert the attention from an obsessive ex-boyfriend of hers. But the man, it turns out, is a heavily closeted and extremely neurotic gay man who, when he fails to be able to perform, goes berserk, rapes and murders her. And hence, it's based on a true life murder. It's been suggested since the film was released that the main character may in fact be suffering from borderline personality disorder, and that combined with a reaction against her Catholic background and going out into the world and experiencing things outside her traditional bubble, have led to her having these responses, these behaviors, trying to find a balance between the much more restrictive lifestyle and one of unrestricted liberalism and hedonism almost. But even so, it's hard to know, given the consequences of the story and the way it's portrayed, whether or not the film is saying that it's fine for her to be behaving like this as long as she does so within sensible, safe boundaries. Like, it's fine going to bars, it's fine sleeping with men, as long as you're reasonably careful about what you're doing. But then, of course, at the end, she's killed by someone on whom she is trying to be nice to, when she lets him down after he's unable to achieve an erection. So it's a well-made film with an excellent performance in the lead role by Diane Keaton, some fine supporting performances by Tuesday Weld as her Golden Girl sister. William Atherton, better known as Walter Peck from Ghostbusters, plays the slightly creepy boyfriend. Richard Gere has a very early role as a John Travolta-like Lothario Chancer. And Tom Berenger appears late in the film as the troubled gay man who winds up being her murderer. But that aside, and some direction, the final murder sequence, which is lit by a strobe light, and we see her face gradually receding into the distance as the strobe light flickers and dies, and as does the character. I thought that was an interesting choice. That aside, it's not a film that's dated terribly well. It's a bit too vague in its morality, perhaps, and one can understand not wanting to be too blunt, but one doesn't know whether or not it's condemning or condoning. And I think those are two very big opposing forces, and you should have some sense which way it's going. Knowing a bit of Diane Keaton's background, I know that she was probably thought that the character's behavior was fine, but leading towards something that could be dangerous. Ironically, it's her trying to be a good person that actually results in her death. But it's hard to know. And as a result, although it's, as I say, well-made film, well acted, it's a bit too It's not. It's a bit too rooted, perhaps, in older, more moralistic filmmaking to be truly satisfying. The unusual thing is that the film is not available on DVD or Blu-ray because of its music soundtrack makes it almost unclearable, and I'd seen a recording from TV. So it's unlikely that you're going to stumble across this in any kind of record store. But even if you did, I would absolutely think twice before spending your money on this.